For the record, I was one of the first to work in institutional custody for crypto assets, not the first. It's the end of the day, so we'll try to keep this speeding along. So, how financial regulation erodes privacy, eliminates human rights, makes us less safe while harming national security and promoting financial exclusion, or how I stopped worrying and learned to love crypto anarchy. All right, Slim Pickens writing the A-bomb down there. Yeah, come on, man. He said after Dr. Strangelove, it was Mr. Pickens. He didn't even have a passport when he went to the airport. They had to get him one. Anyway, so who am I? Privacy and security enthusiast, maybe an expert. Founder and CEO of Evertas, academia, finance, tech, risk management, done all that. Evertas, first crypto insurance company. This is mostly from a US point of view. I live in the US, and the US has an inordinate influence on the international financial system and regulations, although there are obviously other entities that have influence as well. What is Evertas? Insurance. So risk is our business. That's how I always summarize it to people. Risk is what we do. So let's think about privacy. This is an overview of the current impact of financial regulations on privacy. What do we capture today in the financial industry? So your travel, your donations, your expenses, your food, your dining, where you eat, what you subscribe to, what service you pay for. I have this nice string of acronyms. This is a recent article about how MasterCard's going to sell its gold mine of transaction data. So this data is there, it is being mined, and it's being held by third parties, which is super important. What does this mean? That. Everything you do, where you go, who you go to, what books you're buying, what your religion is, your political affiliation, your associations, medical conditions, sexual and gender identity, whatever, this is all easily inferred, if not explicitly said, in financial data. That data is potentially usable against you, right? So you remember the Canadian truckers. I know there's a bunch of Canadians here. In the US, that would be considered a legal, peaceful protest under the First Amendment, even though it was quite annoying, from what I'm told by the residents. Their financial accounts were frozen. This financial information is stored. It can be potentially weaponized if it's taken by third parties. Again, people who supported them had their information stolen. And of course, you're depending on the financial system to look after your best interests, which can change, right? Obviously, in the US, if you've been paying attention, there was a landmark Supreme Court decision about abortion rights that was overturned. Congressional Research Service put out this nice little article where they talked about abortion, data privacy, and law enforcement access. You'll notice they talk about I guess I'll use the laser pointer for this. You can use personal data such as health records, financial records, geolocation information, et cetera. So that information absolutely is out there. New York Times, payment data could become evidence in abortion, now illegal in some states. Now, this financial data, in addition to being weaponized against you and providing data, can also, and we have more examples of this, right? There was this thing called Operation Choke Point, where the US government basically said, nice business you have here, would be a real shame if something happened to it. You should just kind of go against these industries. Again, in the US, things like firearms and ammunition sales, those are constitutionally protected. Whatever you think of the Second Amendment, there was clear presence on pornography protected by the First Amendment. So this is explicitly lawful activity that was being forced out of the financial system. Then there was Operation Choke Point 2, which was rumored about the kind of general crypto industry crackdown by the financial industry and regulators. It certainly contributed to multiple bank collapses, including SVB, which was not fun, as a VC-backed startup. And we have all this data, and it's not just that it can be used against us by the government or the financial institutions that are keeping it, but this data actually can be leaked, right? So FinCEN files, these were the suspicious activity reports by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They were leaked. I don't know if they actually found the person who did it yet. The tax returns of the sitting president of the United States, whatever you thought of Donald Trump, I think it's pretty damning that the US government couldn't keep secret the financial information of the sitting president. And then there was another leak of financial data related to some of the wealthiest people in the US and the world, but those people also represent core parts of our economic and national security base, right? So Jeff Bezos, obviously Amazon, huge company, but AWS does a lot of defense work. SpaceX is a major defense contractor now, and key part of the US's space program, and both military and civilian. Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, and obviously runs one of the, arguably the largest financial information provider in the world. So having personal information about them, I would view as a security issue, but they are billionaires, they have resources to protect themselves. All of us who have our information potentially leaked out there do not have that luxury. So you say, okay, this is not great, all right? We've already seen that this financial information can be misused by the government to attract down illegal activity. We've found that the government can change its minds as to what is legal, and it can be used against you. And they really aren't that great at keeping this data safe, which makes us all targets. But little old me, I'm not important. The billionaires, they have money. This is going to keep us safe against the really bad guys, the terrorists, the weapons of mass destructions, right? Yeah. So, you may be aware that we use the sanctions system that we have there to put sanctions on Huawei because we were afraid that that could be abused by the CCP to spy on people. And of course, a new phone was fairly competitive. The iPhone recently came out, shocking everyone. I should point out a couple things. First off, there's kind of a tit-for-tat thing here, which obviously harmed Apple with a kind of a reciprocal ban. But the other thing that's interesting is that, you can make the argument, it was made that like there was legacy chip technology, that lithography technology in China that allowed them to do this. It wasn't really a strong ban. Like China's a huge economy, a lot of people really enmeshed. So, and sanctions do take some time. So how effective do you really think it could be? All right, let's go to another example. Iran, axis of evil, right? George W. Bush gave that speech back in, I think, 2001 after 9/11. There's been a concerted effort for 20 years to hem in their nuclear program, as well as the activity of the IRGC, or the Quds Force, sorry. IRGC is still doing its thing. Iran's nuclear program has developed substantially, but then you go say, listen, not a good example, all right? We gave them a bunch of money, right? Part of JCOPA, we gave them like $140 billion. Biden just gave them another $6 billion to free some political prisoners. It takes a long time. The sanctions weren't really, fully enforced by some countries, and it's very intermittent. So like Iran's a really bad example. It's not really a good example. All right. Let me think of another country that maybe no one likes. Oh, North Korea. It's called the Hermit Kingdom for a reason. This is a country that its allies, Russia and China, really were very wary of, and I think even still are in the current geopolitical event. I remember going back to the 90s, so like 30 years, very concerted efforts to limit their abilities to build missiles or nuclear weapons. Well, what do they have now? Missiles and nuclear weapons, and recently, nuclear weapons and missiles on a nuclear sub. To be fair, the subs, missiles don't have nuclear weapons on them yet. Okay, so we couldn't really stop China, but not really a great example. Iran, sanctions took too long, but here, even after decades of concerted efforts, we failed. All right, maybe not a good example, because you want something that's swift and furious, that's going to really have a huge impact when it really, really counts, like Russia. As I'm sure everyone here knows, Russia invaded Ukraine a little bit over a year ago. These are some headlines. My favorite is the Nerd Warriors one. This is really a great article if you want to read it, because it talks about how this sanctions regime that we've built since the BSA was passed in the 50s was really designed to bring them to their knees, and they'll be crying. Womp womp. Okay, so these are, that's September 13th, that's about 2 weeks ago. The top article, the one's April. Russia's importing Western weapons technology, bypassing sanctions. Russia overcomes sanctions to expand missile production. Okay, well, I guess it didn't work there. But again, you can make the argument that, in fact, sanctions take a long time. But of course, this then makes one wonder if they're even worth doing. Apparently, being sanctioned by the world is actually better for your economy than Brexit. You can see that IMF projected Russia's going to outperform both Germany and the UK in 2024, and did so in 2023. It was going to in 2023 as well. So, these things don't work. And it's not just me saying it, it's the IMF saying it, and it's the United Nations. About 0.1%, 0.2% by the UN's count of illicit funds are actually seized. And in the same article, this guy's done a bunch of research about the efficacy of this stuff. They talk about the fact that small and medium-sized countries talk about how these exclusions are, all these regulations are excluding people in the financial system. So, and I think in one of his articles, he said it costs $300 billion a year to do the kind of maintain compliance. So we kind of talked about this from a financial inclusion standpoint, from an efficacy standpoint, from a personal safety because your data is getting leaked standpoint. But now I'm going to say this from a red-blooded American standpoint, because I am a patriot. I love my country. I love America. I think the U.S. Constitution and the formation of the U.S. is one of the best things that ever happened to the world. I'm sure many of you will come and disagree with me on that. I know we've done a lot of crappy shit. This is a recent development, right, which is the BRICS, right? So this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, designed to kind of represent the global South, the developing world, whatever kind of euphemisms are being thrown around these days. But countries that are kind of up and coming economically added some more members, two of which were the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So you have three very large oil-producing nations: Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE. You have some very large oil consumers, China and India. Russia also used to produce a lot of oil. And there's been a big push to kind of get away from the usage of the US dollar, right? Because of all of the stuff we've talked about. And quite frankly, when we kicked all the Russian banks out of SWIFT as part of those sanctions that our nerd warriors did, you turned what was an interesting esoteric economic question of, can we get away from the dollar? Is there enough capital markets to support that and debt, to an urgent national security issue? Because, hey, if the US doesn't like me or someone in OFAC decides they're having a bad day, I can no longer actually make any sort of payments inside my country, which no sovereign nation would tolerate. Princess Leia gives some good wisdom to the US on this front. So maybe we should kind of rethink what we're doing this. The idea behind the sanctions regime always was that you would use it in limited circumstances and very judiciously. That's changed drastically over the last 22 plus years, even though it's highly dubious. Actually, no, it's empirically true. They just don't work. So what is this good for? In the words of Edwin Starr, absolutely nothing. They don't work. They create substantial risk. They destroy fundamental human rights, prevents financial inclusion. It's bad for the U.S. national security, U.S. economy, bad for our democratic values, and privilege of the wealthy and powerful while harming the rest, because it's the wealthy and powerful they can afford to avoid this stuff through complex systems of trusts and shell companies and all the other stuff that is necessary for the global economy to work. On the democratic values front, I do want to point out that, back to my point on the BRICS, you are empowering arguably the worst, most autocratic, most authoritarian states to build alternative currency systems, which they can surveil, but their buddies will be happy to use because they don't care about that, because they can do whatever malign activities they want, while pushing people out of our financial system. I think we do need to recognize that the vast majority of the world, from a GDP perspective, from a GDP growth perspective rather than a population growth perspective, are really outside of this relatively narrow slice of people that live in the US, Canada, the EU, Japan, South Korea, and a bit of Oceania, so Australia and New Zealand. And if you want to get a hint of this, look at the UN votes to condemn Russia's invasion. There were a lot of abstentions. So what do we do to fix this? Oof, it's tough. One, we should recognize that a lot of this is actually driven by taxes. People talk about the bad stuff, like the terrorism, right, child pornography, drug trafficking. A lot of this is really making sure that wealthy people, quote unquote, pay their fair share. There are a lot of ways of fixing the tax systems so you can fairly reliably get income and get revenue that are not predicated on surveilling every single transaction. Those can be either as regressive or progressive as you want. It's not a question. This is not a statement about taxation, for the record. Fraud, everyone worries about this. There needs to be better ways of detecting fraud that don't require this kind of massive amount of data intake. Some of this can be done through kind of traffic level surveillance as opposed to kind of knowing individuals. Also, I think people talk about bad things, but there may be no actual harm, right? So if you want to go set up an anonymous Amazon account, you would burn your email over a VPN and pay for it with gift cards that you paid for in cash, they'll shut you down because they're afraid they're going to have the regulators come after them for being a money launderer, right? Because I can go scam you, get an Amazon gift card, buy some goods, take those goods off Amazon, and then physically sell them for cash. But from Amazon's perspective, they're actually getting paid. There is not really any harm. And quite frankly, it's fairly easy to off-ramp cash as it is already. People talk about stopping bad people doing bad things. This is true, but this system doesn't work. And this is a nice way for everyone to pretend that they've actually done something without actually doing it. Because you get to go sit there and say, well, I passed a law. I have all these regulations. What you have to do is like real investigations, real police work, if you watch The Wire. Maybe an error for definition of bad. A lot of this money laundering came out of the drug wars, and there's a lot of smuggling and weapons traffic and crime that kind of came out of that too, so maybe we should think about that. This is totally not comprehensive or fully thought through, but what we're doing is not working. And that's all, folks. There's Wile E. Coyote falling off the cliff, kind of like our financial regulatory efficacy. So, questions? Oh, all right. I mean, I have some thoughts, right? Like you could do, like I said, I would think if we recognize that most of this is driven by tax policy, then that's an indication that you should just change the way you collect taxes. There's clearly ways of viewing sorts of analysis where you can see different patterns of activity, but without having to know what necessarily the activity is to detect kind of fraudulent things. I just, when you're collecting 0.1% of all bad monies, right, that are flowing through the system, one has to wonder if the juice is worth the squeeze. I think that a system that is fundamentally abusive to people because it requires them to give up their information, their privacy, and be at the whims of folks. You know, my company is a Lloyd's cover holder. We are one of the most regulated companies that you can imagine, and it is a struggle to get access to the banking system because we're crypto, even though we are literally a normal insurance company in every way. I don't think that's morally right or justifiable, especially when you can show no meaningful outcome. And whatever people will infer with some secret, well, I know this one case, it's like the ticking time bomb scenario. You probably would have been able to actually, if you know there's a ticking time bomb, there's probably other information you know that doesn't require you, ripping off someone's fingernails or whatever they're trying to justify with that example. So, yes, I have some thoughts. But I also have I had 20 minutes. Any other questions? All right, then I'll get out of your hair. Thank you guys for patiently listening. It's the end of the day.